European male who has illicit carnal intercourse with a native female, and any native male who has illicit carnal intercourse with a European female shall be guilty of an offence and liable on conviction to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 5 years. Hello and welcome to episode number 3 of my new series, which is all about learning English by reading books. And for the purposes of today's video, we're going to leave Ireland and Great Britain behind for a sec. We're going all the way down to South Africa. One place is going to be of particular importance to us, being Johannesburg, because Johannesburg is the birthplace of the author whose memoir I've picked for this week's discussion. So, Trevor Noah and his memoir entitled Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood. As you can probably tell by my voice, influenza has taken over Munich and has gripped it by its throat. At least my throat is still inflamed, but I thought, you know what, life is too short not to film a video just because of my voice, which gets affected all the time. I don't know why. So, without further ado, let's crack on! No coffee today, just water. I'll be honest with you guys, prior to reading this book, I had no idea that Trevor Noah, the guy that, used to host the Daily Show, the famous stand-up comedian that can skillfully put on accents, one of them being Russian. He's been in life through so much, he's suffered so much, he's been exposed to violence from an early age. So, this constant exposure to domestic violence, he was surrounded by all sorts of criminals, so no real prospects in life. Him being a mixed child under apartheid, all of it toughened him up for life. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna read aloud the blurb to you guys, because it nicely sums up what this book is about. Trevor Noah's unlikely path from apartheid South Africa to the desk of the Daily Show began with a criminal act, his birth. Trevor was born to a white Swiss father and a black Xhosa mother at a time when such a union was punishable by 5 years in prison. Born a Crime is the story of a mischievous young boy who grows into a restless young man as he struggles to find himself in a world where he was never supposed to exist. It is also the story of that young man's relationship with his fearless, rebellious and fervently religious mother, his teammate, a woman determined to save her son from the cycle of poverty, violence and abuse that would ultimately threaten her own life. Whether subsisting on a caterpillars for dinner during hard times, being thrown from a moving car during an attempted kidnapping, or just trying to survive the life and death pitfalls of dating in high school, Trevor illuminates his curious world with an incisive wit and unflinching honesty. Then we've got also quite a few passages devoted to his mom and her upbringing. So she was a second child, which was not beneficial. Somehow she did not have a good relationship with her mother, but she adored her father, whom she actually went to live with, but he didn't want to live with her, so Patricia, and so she was sent to live on a farm with her aunt and her many cousins, where he would fight over a piece of meat. That's how poor they were. And so when she turned 21, the aunt had to send her away because she got ill, and she ended up going back to the township, so Soweto, where she enrolled in a secretary course, which she successfully finished, and then started working as a secretary and earned the most in the family. However, she was not allowed She was not allowed to keep her salary because her mum said, as long as you live under the same roof as I do, you've got to provide for the family. So regardless of what the family needed, a window or a bucket or any item in the household, Patricia was supposed to get by that item. She was not happy, right? And so what she did was she hopped on a train to Johannesburg and just disappeared. With one problem, black people were not supposed to live in big cities, and so she found a way how she could stay in Johannesburg, started mingling with local prostitutes who turned out to be Xhosa, so of her own tribe, that advised her in that language, and they gave her a piece of advice. So she would put on the overalls of maid, because as Trevor Noah said, the white people needed the black people to come and mop their floors and clean their bathrooms, right? That's why townships, like on the outskirts of big cities. And so she just sort of went underground and stayed in Johannesburg. She had her own flat, and that's exactly where she meets Robert, Trevor's future father, a Swiss-German white, 46 years old. They started dating, and she told him she'd like to have a baby from him, so she asked explicitly for his permission. He eventually said yes, and she got pregnant. She said, "Don't you worry, no obligations, you don't even have to look at the baby. It is going to be solely my baby. I'm going to provide for that baby, I'm going to care for that baby. You're not supposed to do anything," okay? Because she was so independent, so, quote, a free roaming spirit, so disobedient, right? What I really found interesting about Patricia, so Trevor's mother, is that she was deeply religious. They would go to 3 churches each Sunday: white church, black church, mixed church. So the first book Trevor Noah ever held in his hands was the book, so the Bible. She actually educated Trevor as if he was white. She would take him to places where only white kids would go. People thought my mum was crazy. Ice rinks and drive-ins and suburbs. These things were izinto zabelungu, the things of white people. So many black people had internalized the logic of apartheid and made it their own. Why teach a black child white things? Neighbours and relatives used to pester my mum. Why do all this? Why show him the world when he's never going to leave the ghetto? Because, she would say, even if he never leaves the ghetto, he will know that the ghetto is not the world. If that is all I accomplish, I've done enough. Boom. I am in awe of that woman. And of course, Trevor explicitly says that he is eternally indebted to his mum for bringing him into this world, for showing him the possibilities, and for making him believe that the world is his, right? Wow, that's my takeaway message, that's for sure. Turning to the themes, I mean, obviously I've touched upon a lot of them already. He's talking about apartheid all the time. It's this racial segregation, or a set of rules based on the colour of skin. So the whites, even though they were a small minority, they were given all the privileges, and they could become anything they wanted to in life, right? Then the coloured people, who could actually apply to become a white person, which is like, what? And the black people, that the people that were denied everything in life. He also talking about those rules as being arbitrary, because why on earth would Chinese people get categorized as black people? For example, shocked when I found out that people could name their kids after Hitler, Napoleon, Mussolini, just because they don't know what those people did to other people, right? Trevor is actually blaming the Western people, for having exploited the black people, having put the black people in work, but having not educated the black people enough, so they didn't know what Hitler did, what atrocities he did, right? If you know nothing about South Africa, if you know nothing about apartheid, then this book is really for you guys. It's so informative, it's so insightful, it's so historical. Because Trevor was born into a poor family, we've got quite often phrases like, we got by with next to nothing. Yeah, I really like it. We got by on so little. My mother used to get angry at the fact that I grew out of my school uniforms too fast. Okay, so grew out of something. After suffering my Valentine's Day heartbreak. Okay, so we've got, you can break somebody's heart and then you suffer a heartbreak. I never considered myself worthy of dating her. So this worthy of plus present participle. It's a dead end. Okay, so it's a dead end. You can't get out of there or out of here. It's a dead end. In cities, most people speak at least some English and usually a bit of Afrikaans, enough to get around. Okay, so this get around, like in the city, is like basically to get from point A to point B, if you can a bit of English and a bit of Afrikaans. I messed around in chat rooms. It's like slobbed around in chat rooms. Was being idle. Tom was a chatterbox. Somebody who loves talking. Went to some bargain clothing store where you could buy really cheap clothing. Guys were gawking at her like she was an animal at the zoo. Okay, so this gawking with her eyes wide open. Finally, we realized it wasn't going to happen. Okay, so Abel wasn't going to keep his promise and to let Trevor drive his BMW. And so he ended up driving a Mazda to that dance. I was crushed, like so destroyed, so devastated, as opposed to crushed. Again, interesting phonologically. I was mortified, embarrassed. I'd been mesmerized by her beauty, like enchanted. Illicit is illegal. I didn't know that. Liable, having legal responsibilities for something. Loopholes, small mistakes in law. Fifi had no malicious intent, so no bad intentions. A child that looks nothing like either parent. I mean, we've talked about that. Neither, right? So normally we've got two parents. That a child that looks nothing like either parent. So neither like dad nor like mom. The Afrikaner is a descendant of the Dutch colonist. Most coloured people speak Afrikaans. I was the anomaly wherever we lived. The animosity I felt from the coloured people I encountered growing up was one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with. You will face more hate and ridicule and ostracism than you can ever begin to fathom. So this fathom is like to comprehend. When apartheid came, coloured people defied easy categorization. So this word defy, you can defy something, so you disobey the authority, right? Or something defies description or categorization. It's not easy to, or it was not easy to categorize coloured people. Coloured people were second-class citizens. It wasn't a myth, it was real. Some coloured people got promoted to white. All you had to do was denounce your people, denounce your history, and leave your darker-skinned friends and family behind. It was completely arbitrary, right? So arbitrary, random. The pencil test. If you applied to be white or to get promoted as white, they would do the pencil test. If it fell out, then you were white. If it stayed in, then you were black. Or like too black. Making a snap decision. The opposite of making an informed decision. You make a living to support your family. You make a living. I was bullied all the time. Trevor, you've been robbed. Why didn't you chase them? I thought they were being nice. I thought I'd made a friend. By that point, I'd developed thick skin. I was used to being bullied. Okay, so this thick skin, not easily getting upset or hurt. I shrugged it off. Went back to picking berries. A split second before I could even react, some berries weren't ripe. They stung like rocks. Okay, so stung. They were calling me names. I looked like I'd been beaten to a pulp. Get beaten up heavily. He had a temper. In a flash, Abel would be out of the car. A full-blown sit-down lecture about relationships. You look at me. You acknowledge me. Women like to be noticed. That's how his mom taught him how to court a girl, how to start a relationship. One would part ways. Everyone went their own way. I liked her. I didn't have a crush on her. I just liked hanging out with her. Okay, so to have a crush on somebody, to really like someone. When someone plants the idea in your head, okay, so this metaphor, to plant a seed. The friend sorted it out. I stood no chance. I had no chance. I stood no chance. Without using the brakes. Yes, so in the car you've got the brakes. Do you need a towel? I thought it was interesting. Towel as opposed to toe. Ow. Yeah. It's actually to give a little push when the car is stuck. Thanks to my long walk to school, I was late every single day. I'd have to stop off in the prefect's office to write my name down for detention. So detention is like a punishment measure used quite regularly in schools when you are late. Not only. It's a wonderful example of the phenomenon called habitual past. Thanks to my long walk to school, I was late every single day. I'd have to stop off in the prefect's office to write my name down for detention. Daddy's been arrested for shoplifting. Basically stealing stuff from a shop. I eavesdropped on their whole conversation from the other room, so overheard, but intentionally. Are you sure Trevor wasn't involved? My mum thought she'd caught me red-handed. Red-handed, right? So, I think it comes from Latin. I went back to my room thinking I was in the clear. So it's like everything has been cleared up. I was always first in line. Place your orders, gentlemen. The elevator was busted. So this word busted is like out of order. My mum finally relented and gave me 2,000 rand, I think, to buy a nice suit for that dance. Relented, sort of gave in. The Matrix came out while I was in high school. Came out, so a film comes out, a book comes out. It was like the makeover scenes in my American movies. And the ugly duckling becomes the swan. So there is this story about the ugly duckling that becomes a swan. And he compares himself to that duckling because he gets his hair done nicely for the dance. I think it's called cornrow. But what he had to undergo, that chemical treatment, like to treat his hair with some chemical. You've got to read it. Yeah, it's called chemical relaxer. When it starts burning, tell me, we'll rinse it out. To put that in perspective, yeah, it's really important to put that in perspective. So you compare things to see like how important something is or how unimportant something is, right? Thatched huts. So people used to live in thatched huts in the wake of something, as a consequence. We'll make a fortune. Sort of way to corner the market. So basically to monopolize the market, is it? To be the only supplier or provider on the market. We hustled cities all day and DJ'd parties at night. So this hustled, like worked hard. DJ'd parties. There you go, conversion. DJ, nicely converted to DJ'd, a verb. They don't have any running water. They've bathed in a bucket from the outdoor tap and then dumped the dirty water in the street. Dumped. The unemployment rate for young black men post-apartheid shot up. Many young men in South Africa's townships, they are free. They've been taught how to fish, but no one will give them a fishing rod, and so they end up doing nothing. So Robert was reserved and rational, and Mom was wild and impulsive. So he was ice, she was fire. Because racism never made sense to my father, he never subscribed to any of the rules of apartheid. Okay, so subscribed to black travelers and diplomats from other countries who in theory weren't subject to the same restrictions as black South Africans. So they were not subject to, okay, this law did not apply to them. Black South Africans with money in turn exploited that loophole to frequent those restaurants. So it's like you've got this adjective frequent, but the verb to frequent. I love conversion in English. The word animosity, understandably, comes up quite often in this memoir. The restaurant closed only because a few people in the neighborhood took it upon themselves to complain. Love this phrase. They took it upon themselves. They decided it was their duty to report back on his Swiss dad, to the authorities and so on and so forth. They filed petitions, began a legal process. Again, interesting, so you have a file, like a cabinet to store documents in, or you can file a petition, right? Which again is a minimal pair was failed. That failed dismally, badly, dismally. Vibrant melting pot of black and white and every other hue. I didn't know, hue, like shades in a colour. So, really nice metaphor. My father and I lived on a schedule. When I was 13, we lost touch. My career took off quickly. Okay, like a plane that takes off. His career as a comedian took off quickly. Questions about my dad were always there, in the back of my mind, here, in the back of his mind, like subconsciously. My mom never spoke ill of him. I started by reaching out to, I think, the Swiss embassy. We picked up right where we'd left off, in an instant. Circumstance had pulled us apart. I walked out of his house an inch taller, meaning he gave him confidence. Seeing him had reaffirmed his choosing of me to make up for all the years we'd missed. Why are you interrogating me? I want to get to know you. So what he found out was that his dad was extremely secretive. Yeah, so people would name their children like Hitler, and Trevor saying, a case of the West reaping what it has sown. So, sown. in high school we weren't taught to think critically about Hitler and anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. We weren't taught that the architects of apartheid were big fans of Hitler, that the racist policies they put in place were inspired in part by the racist policies of the Third Reich. People would ask him a question, doesn't he think that the Holocaust is the worst atrocity in human history? And he says, what about African atrocities, like in the Congo? But because people failed to protocol, to write things down, there are no numbers. Like there are numbers with regards to the Holocaust, that 6 million people were slaughtered. I gravitated towards him, and I gravitate towards you, towards books, to keep my English up. Yeah, just, you know, you learn so much from books. Like, I got plenty of information from this book, culturally, language-wise. I wish you all well, and I'll see you in my next video next week. Всем пока. Tschüss zusammen. Bye guys. See you soon.